Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Universe Podcast. Today we are talking about the amazing amount of new content that was dropped on us by Disney+. And joining myself are Ashley Coffin and Brian V. Klein. And we're going to have all that for you and more right after a commercial break we have no control over. All right, welcome back. As I said, my name is Matthew. Joining me are, first of all, Ashley Coffin. Ashley has already done 3 hours today talking about Marvel Universe. Ash, how are you doing today?
I'm happily overwhelmed. Like, there's just so much to talk about.
Yeah, I get that. I tuned in for about the last hour of the Marvel cast, and it was... the only problem I have with all this is I get super psyched listening to it, and then I'm like, okay, so we can go watch it now, right? Now we can go watch it? Oh, we have to wait 2 years? God darn it. Also joining this podcast for the first time with us, although he's been a regular on a number of other Stranded Panda Stranded Panda products, is Brian V. Klein. Brian, how are we doing today?
Hello there. I'm doing good.
Kenobi.
Yeah.
Brian, I am so glad to have you with us. I got to say, we did a live stream that night as the new announcements were coming out, and it was so great to have you being... knowing even more about Star Wars than I did, going so deep on the content. And I just knew, halfway through that conversation, I need to get you on an episode to talk about this, because there's so many doors we're unlocking, so many things that are being opened up.
Oh, that's for sure. That whole Disney investor call was just overload of information, and it was great, especially when they came to, every time they announced something new, it was just, oh my God. And then they dropped stuff out that they didn't even know of that was going to happen. And then that was just the FX stuff. And then they did the Disney stuff. And then by the time they got to Marvel, it was just like, I was spent. And it was a great day, an unexpected day too. But the Star Wars content was just,
I know.
Unreal.
I mean, we had Star Wars, we had MCU. If anybody wants, since Ashley's just doing this all day, someone should hop on and talk with her about Willow and all the Disney content. So, we can just do it all. Now I can see Ashley's face as I volunteer for things, which is great. So let me actually just start with this for both of you. Going into this, how are you feeling about Star Wars content? Obviously we've had Mandalorian coming out. Before then we had Kathleen Kennedy running not the best trilogy, I think, in many ways. A lot of us have different opinions on what parts worked, what part didn't. But I think there's a pretty universal agreement that there wasn't a lot of coherency among those movies. We've liked The Mandalorian quite a bit. How are you feeling about the idea of more Star Wars content when this all got started?
I'll go first here. I'm very excited and very optimistic because I think, in just a general term, it seems like we've got the right creatives in charge of the direction of the franchise now. And it sort of came out of nowhere last year, where if you would have asked the average Star Wars fan, say the summer of 2019, who Dave Filoni was, a lot of people wouldn't know who he was, unless you were a fan of Clone Wars or Rebels, and realized that this guy actually was the student of George Lucas since 2005. I mean, he worked at his feet on Clone Wars and Rebels. Now you see it coming into live action, and it's just like, where's this guy been? So for him to be a creative on this whole thing, it's like you were saying that I enjoyed for the most part the sequel trilogy, but it just seemed like it was two separate narratives going and fighting against each other. And so now that you have one thing, if Filoni and Favreau become like the Star Wars equivalent of Feige, I'll be happy.
Yeah. I had been saying for a while as I watched the prequels that it made me feel like I now truly understand just how valuable Feige was to the MCU, because having that one, if you'd had someone in the room who could say, okay, JJ, Ryan, you need to put your heads together and figure this out and come up with a coherent story, the three of you can tell, I think all three movies would have been so much better. And I now feel like we have that, Mm-hmm. Ashley, what about yourself? How are you feeling about it going into this?
I feel like I'm finally going to get to dig so much deeper into this universe without just having to wiki or Google or read or, I get to see now stories firsthand that I wouldn't know anything about. We'll get into it a lot deeper as we start to go through the different things, but it's very exciting.
Yeah. I think that's one of the greatest points is so much of this material that we're getting now is it's opening up so much more of the universe. And I think it's one of the things and so let's just kind of use that to jump in. Like, so we'll go through product by product, but just as the basis, like, now you heard the announcements. How are you feeling? What were some of your first thoughts on it all?
Ahsoka.
Yeah.
I can't wait for this. And they said that that's going to be during the Mandalorian time.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously everybody's going to meet up a couple times. We have like our Star Wars Defenders thing going on here, and I love it. And I just, it seems like they're trying to stick to some interconnectivity like the Marvel side's doing, and I'm here for it.
And I will preface this. I'm going to probably, because like Matthew said, I do have I'm 47 years old. I've been with Star Wars since the beginning. I've read all the expanded universe, all the comics, all the new novels, so I have like a knowledge of it. So if I start using words like ABY and BBY, because those things are actually come up in the thing, it means the central point in the Star Wars timeline is the Battle of Yavin. So BBY is before the Battle of Yavin, ABY is after the Battle of Yavin. I'm just prefacing that out there. I'm sure most of the fans know that, but some people may not know, what the time frame is. So Ashley, right there. So
yeah,
I was
right
like,
there.
Are those two cute little robots?
They
ABY
totally
and
should be at some
BBY.
point. And I'll say I'm kind of halfway in between you two, because I have been a diehard Star Wars fan as well. I'm a little younger than you, Brian, but I can say that in a way, Star Wars was the first movie I ever saw in the theaters because my mother was pregnant with me when she saw it. So it is again like, part of me in that regard. My mother would often joke that she didn't need to go get a babysitter when I was young, because if she just put A New Hope in the Betamax, I wasn't going anywhere. Yeah. And I have academically dived into it a lot. I actually wrote a couple of my major thesis papers in graduate school on the philosophy and theology of Star Wars. So I went quite deep in that regard. I have not read as much of the extended universe as you have, Brian. So I'm really excited to hear you bringing that in. What I have been, though, is, and I've been a big evangelist for some of the other TV shows that existed that until recently have never gotten much attention. Things like The Clone Wars, Rebels, a little bit Resistance, though I think that's not quite as well loved as the other two.
Right.
And one thing I've really loved of these last, especially from Mandalorian, but also just these last 2 weeks, it feels like there's so much interest now in those shows, because we're just bringing it all back. Like, all those things from those shows are suddenly coming to life on the screen.
Oh yeah, that was what was funny. Was a couple weeks ago there was this meme where it was basically the Trojan horse coming to the gates of the city, and it was Filoni saying to Star Wars, "Here's a show about bounty hunters." In the right after Return of the Jedi, and then inside it says Clone Wars characters. And so he's like, all right, we'll bring him in here, because he didn't do much in the first season with that, but the second season it was just name it, Bo-Katan, and then they had Ahsoka, and then they brought, Boba back. I was actually glad this week when there was not a big, cameo or a new introduction of a character that everyone was waiting for, and it just let the story play out. But yeah, the Clone Wars, I think once it went to Netflix after it was canceled, it got a little bit of a rejuvenation. They brought out the Lost Missions then, and then Rebels, the same thing. Both of them, when they went on streaming, gained so much more traction and such a bigger following after the fact when they were on, which is nice to see.
And Ashley, I know you've been dipping your toe a little bit into the Clone Wars stuff, and it's 15 years ago, and it's a kids show. It has a lot of really great points, but I think you were definitely having some struggles with a part of it.
Yeah. I Googled, like, what are the top episodes that you should watch, and I watched those.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
It was like Ahsoka leaving, the whole thing with her, the stuff with Darth Maul, which makes stuff in Han Solo make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obi-Wan and his little girlfriend. I see you, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Mm-hmm. How close he came.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think with that idea of that we're bringing in the characters is such a good way to put it, because one of the things that I really love about an extended universe is when you can start filling in the details of, okay, these grand battles are happening, but what's happening to the man on the street? What's happening in the universe to the people who aren't fighting the grand battles but are affected by them? That's honestly a big part of what I loved about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the MCU Defenders, was that a lot of them were much more about, okay, what's happening below the scenes. And I think, honestly, that's one of my biggest takeaways, is I feel like we are getting so much new content that's about, okay, the everyday fighters of an X-Wing squadron, and, the people who are not, making the big decisions back on the home planets, but just the people out on the rim trying to extend the new galaxy, or, Andor trying to, show us some more of that part of the world. Do you guys have a kind of similar feeling about that we're going to get to really dive down into some of more the nitty gritty of this universe?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, and it's refreshing because most of the stuff that I've had, like my past history with, is you sort of have to mentally visualize it because it's all in, especially like the novels. But now it is, they're keeping it Star Wars, but it seems like they're going into the weeds. They're going into, like with this. I mean, but then again, we don't know what some of these things are. That Rangers of the New Republic show is just like, here's what it is. It's in the Mandalorian universe, but we don't know what it's going to focus on.
Yeah.
As long as it stays the course of being Star Wars and feel, it's fine by me.
Yeah,
see how it
that's
executes.
really all we need,
Yeah.
And that's Filoni and Favreau, that one and Ahsoka, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, is that it really feels like there's now once again we have a consistent vision of what Star Wars is supposed to be, and I am. It's interesting because I think some of it, like, I love Clone Wars, I love Rebels. It has the prequel problem you sometimes get of you try to create all this new stuff in between the things you've already seen, and then you start wondering, well, wait, why didn't we know about this before? I love Rebels. Why Ahsoka Tano wasn't involved in the main first three movies, we've just kind of glided over that. So I am hoping there's at least a little more of that, but
I was going to say, it has the sense of a lot of times where they're talking about, they're like, well, this happened during this. Why wasn't it mentioned in one of the movies? And a lot of times is those movies are so focused on one thing that you're not going to find out about every single thing that happened at that same time,
right. Which
is how they can. I mean, Star Wars has always been about the quote unquote certain point of view where you can get around stuff by, like, I remember when Clone Wars came out and it's like, Anakin had a Padawan? What?
Yeah.
But they explained it perfectly.
Yeah.
And so that's how they, it's Clone Wars was sort of like MASH, where it was an 8-year season or 7-year season for a time period that lasted 3 years in the actual universe. So what you were talking about being everything jumbled is sort of how like the Marvel comics are now, because it's just like they've had 100 comics that lasted between A New Hope and Empire. It's like, wait, where did all these other characters come from? Where did they go? But then again, you go back and it's focused on the Skywalker story. So there's a lot of other stuff going on in that whole battle, but
yeah. I was going to say, I'm so ready for this whole extended universe without a Skywalker, but then they're like, but we're bringing back Anakin. Yay.
And we're going to have thoughts on that, which we will get to for sure.
We'll get there.
I'll just say the one.
I do just the Ahsoka thing. Like, I love the character and I love that they're bringing in, but I was talking about it with a coworker today, and there's no way that she wouldn't be brought up at least at some point in Revenge of the Sith. And I hate that because it's such a cool character, but you would think Obi-Wan would at least, call her, even if she was on a mission, to be like, oh, he might listen to you. He ain't listening to me. Yeah. He's crazy. Anakin. That's the only like little teeny problem I have.
And I do feel like that's now, because I think you're right. I think that there's some just inconsistencies there. But part of my feeling is, and Jeff is saying in the chat, as well as what you said, Brian, about F and F, like we're calling them Feige and Filoni, that part of what that means is that there's now going to be someone making sure of that. Saying like, oh, okay, I've read your script for this, but you should know that this other thing happens in this other movie, and that's going to connect. So how can you like put that in? Which I'm really looking forward to.
And technically they were supposed to have that now with the story group, but it didn't seem like the Lucasfilm story group was really doing much of that, because they let a lot of stuff go through with the 7, 8, 9, because that thing was destined to fail when you didn't have one cohesive thing behind it. But that's not what we're talking about here. But that's the whole thing, is the story group is almost like a name only now. If they run everything through Filoni filter, if I want to call it like that, or Favreau filter, it'll be for a lot more. You'll get the same type of feel from the stories. You won't get something that's completely disjointed. I hope.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think in this regard, and I'm not just saying this because like we're just following the MCU stuff, but I really think that the MCU has set such a new understanding of how you can build things, and I feel like Star Wars is now learning from that. I'm excited to see what other networks are going to learn from that. The one other kind of general comment I want to make, and this is especially Brian, I'm curious your thoughts and any fans in the room. When Disney first took over, one of the things they did was to basically just say all of that extended universe that happened in the novels, we're just going to kind of forget about all of it. And we're just going to put it all to the side and say, that was great, but we're going to create our whole new canon. And, you know, there was a lot of people very upset about that. I think for good reason, because it was a very well built out, I'll admit some of the writing I think is not the best quality I've ever read, but some great story stuff that's developed. And some wonderful writing.
About 20% of it was crap, I would say, at least.
The writer of Darth Bane creates a great story. He does not know how to write romance. I'll just put that out.
Drew Carpathian, yeah. That's a great trilogy, but yeah, they didn't need to put that into the Sith story, you know.
But my point is, it has definitely felt to me like, I mean, even with Rebels, but especially now with this, that we're getting so much more of the extended universe is now bleeding in. You know, are you getting some of that feeling that like a lot of the books are being honored in some way with things like Thrawn and the Bad Batch and Rogue Squadron and stuff like that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it started with Thrawn, especially when you brought back Zahn to create. Once they brought him back in Rebels, and then he's created a trilogy that's done, and now they have another trilogy that the second book comes out in January, which is in everything that comes out now is in the new canon. And the only thing I would say is that don't expect when they bring things in that they're going to be the exact same as what they were in the old EU.
Yeah.
But like you were saying before, is when they announced that was done, I was actually relieved in a sense because it was, I think at that time, the old expanded universe, which is now Legends, there's like 130 novels. And it's a lot to digest. But also with them saying that that's all Legends, it leaves the people that are making the movies so much, they have a blank canvas. They don't have to say, oh, well, Chewbacca died here when he got a planet or a moon fell on him. Or, you know, there's Jaina and Jason Solo and stuff like that. I wish they would have been able to go and finish the story they were telling. But for them having none of that, the characters and stuff are there if they need them, but they don't have to be the exact same, but they don't have to, you know, abide by that story that was told already.
Brian, I think it's a great point. And in a lot of ways, it makes me think of what the MCU has done. And I think this would be a very good model for them to follow, where the MCU is telling stories about characters from comic books. And some of the stories that they're telling are taken from the comic books, and some of the stories are new. But they're not trying to recreate the stories. They're just creating new stories based on those. And in large cases where plot points are inspired by those. I think that in many ways, that's exactly what that's exactly what Star Wars should do. Say, kind of treat those extended universe novels as the comic books, as here's content we're going to pull into, here's stories we can retell, here's characters we can retell, but we're not going to try and do a page-to-page retelling. You know, the ending might be totally different. The antagonist might be totally different.
Oh yeah, but the only problem with that right now is with Star Wars is that the ongoing comics and novels are in it. So unless they pull back on that production of the publishing, it sort of handcuffs, because it seems like even with this announcement, none of the 10 things that were announced or, you know, expanded on were set that we know of in the sequel trilogy. They're all set in, you know, the prequel era or before, or in the Mandalorian time, it seems. What that does, though, that's where a lot of the comics are situated now. So if those start, you know, you can't tell a guy who's making, you know, like the Mandalorian saying, well, in the book, and this is what happened in the Mandalorian with Cobb Vanth. In the Aftermath novel, he had an introduction of his backstory about how he got the armor, which was slightly different than it was on the Mandalorian. It was, I think, the unreliable narrator perspective. It was close enough to where it wasn't completely off the wall. But I think if you have that much in the actual current publishing affecting what's coming out on the TV or the movies, you're going to start, you know, making the story group or whoever work too much, or just they'll start contradicting themselves. Now, they can use the old Legends in EU as a, like you said, as the basis for a character or a backstory, and that doesn't mean it doesn't have to match up there.
Yeah. No, and I was talking just about the Legends canon, you're right. Although even with some of the new canon, like I'll admit, one character I was desperately missing, and Ashley, I promise we'll stop diving into this quite as much in just a second. But I kept wondering, why are we not seeing Ventress? And then I realized it's because, and for anyone who doesn't know, Asajj Ventress is a character who gets... Okay.
I know.
Ashley, you want to tell us?
I'm so happy. I get that
Who's Asajj Ventress?
She's Count Dooku's Padawan?
Basically, yeah.
Okay, good.
But she's set up as very much kind of a equivalent to Ahsoka in some ways. And towards the end of Clone Wars, the two of them have both left the Jedi and the Sith and wind up kind of having some adventures together. And I have long wanted an Ahsoka and Asajj Ventress buddy cop show. Apparently in one of the novels, Ventress dies. I think that is one of the canon novels you're talking about, Brian.
Yeah.
Where frankly, I'd be very happy if they undid that canon, but fair enough.
It was she was protecting, she was actually on a mission working with Quinlan Vos for the Jedi, and she protects Quinlan Vos from being killed by Dooku. So pretty much, essentially, Dooku kills Ventress. Which, yeah, that's then again, no one's really dead in Star Wars. I mean, I think Darth Maul is dead now because he was actually buried in Tatooine. But you never know. For narrative purpose, they could always bring him back somehow. But I think they have to find a way that she survived that week because she was just a fascinating character, especially when you find out her backstory about being a Jedi. I mean, she was being trained as a Jedi, and then she basically got left behind when her master got killed, and then she just got adopted by the Night Sisters on Dathomir, and
she's an incredible character that deserves some time out of the Clone Wars. Jess also makes a great point that it makes it easier for fans to not be disappointed if things aren't exactly the original, but the spirit is still there.
Right. And also a direct adaptation of stuff sort of leaves the mystery out of it. If you know what's going to happen, it kind of, you like seeing it pan out, but if you know what the ending's going to be, it kind of, there's no level of suspense there.
I think that's so true. Yeah. So let's first start by talking about how two of the new things that are coming are all going to be part of the same Mandalorian timeline. We have Ahsoka, and we have Rangers of the New Republic.
Correct.
Let's start here and with Ashley, because I know you were talking about it. How are you feeling about knowing that Ahsoka's going to get her own TV show?
That's all I wanted when we were talking about where we thought the character was going a couple weeks ago. It's like, I need more of what you're doing. I'm not satisfied, and I need more. And I kind of had a feeling it was either going to be a movie or a series. Just they put so much work into her, and they didn't give us a lot of her. Mm-hmm. I was like, that would kind of just be a waste. So I'm thrilled.
Good. I know you'd watched a couple Clone Wars episodes, but you didn't know much about her, right? I mean, when she appeared on screen in Mandalorian, this was really your first introduction.
I feel like after Bo-Katan had said, when we all went crazy when she was like, you got to go find Ahsoka Tano, and I had 2 weeks to figure out who she was. That's when I watched a lot of the Clone Wars stuff. So when the episode came, I was ready. I knew we were going to talk about it, and I wanted to be able to have part of the conversation. I did. Ken's like, what? Are you on hour 10 of this cartoon? I was like, you need to go in the other room. I am doing research. It looked like I was solving some kind of crime. I had papers everywhere. That's awesome. It's like Bo-Katan and Mandalore.
Mm-hmm. Well, and honestly, that's one of the best things I think I can hear, because honestly, part of my fear when I start seeing all this stuff from these TV shows that I love that are nowhere near as known is, are we going to start alienating everybody? And so actually, I think knowing that, I think this is true for so many others, people who had never heard of Ahsoka Tano before they saw The Mandalorian, I think we're all super hyped for that TV show.
Mm-hmm. It's insane that when you're like, oh, it was Anakin's Padawan, you're like, I'm sorry, what did you say? Who? Wait. Yeah, and you would think that character would be more prevalent in all the other movies, but I love what, they did with the cartoon. They did a good job filling it in, and that last episode was really good to kind of say, well, this is where she was when, Order 66 was being done. It was okay.
They tried. They tried to Order 66 her, but and that explains a whole lot with. I think what you're going back and saying about, if I can chime in here, is that the character reveals in The Mandalorian, even going back to last season with the Darksaber, it doesn't leave someone alienated, but it allows them or makes them go, what is this? And then go find out the history, because it's all in a lot of the animated stuff, and it's all easily accessible on Disney Plus. So that's why I think this year it was, so far in like 4 or 5 episodes in a row, it was, okay, this is going to launch another series, and this is going to launch another series, and this is going to launch another series. They were smart on it, but it didn't pull away from the narrative of the show that you're watching.
Yeah. No, and I will say one little kind of fun thing about that. When we first started the Star Wars Universe podcast, we were doing a couple of things, one of which is episode-by-episode reviews of the Clone Wars. And it's not a very popular series. There's a lot of it. And I think there's some wonderful parts to it. Some parts are kind of schlocky. And our numbers for those episodes have been lower than a lot of others. All of a sudden, there's a bunch of people going back and finding those old Clone War episodes we recorded and listening. And those numbers are going up by about 20-30%. So that's been really fun to watch. So, yeah, it looks like people are jumping into this.
And I remember when it was, because I watched that show week by week when it was originally airing. And there was one time during season 2 where it was Newsweek or Time or one of the magazines said the best political show on television that you're not watching is Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Because that was when they were getting into, there was a lot of politics in it. And it was interesting, I'm sure. And there was a lot of times, like you were mentioning, that it was a kid show. It was definitely designed for kids, but there's a lot of stuff on there that would be way over kids' heads. And especially, I mean, can you imagine a 5-year-old kid trying to understand the Mortis trilogy? Oh, yeah. There's no way. So it was geared towards adults, or geared towards kids, but also made for adults. So, that's...
I think they did better after season 1 was kind of, I think that's when I just was like, I can't do this. And then Matthew's like, don't forget season 1, just move on. And then it got a lot.
When they went linear, because if you look at the episode guide, like the first episode you don't watch is not the first episode of the show. It's like season 2, episode 4 is the first thing in the time frame. Once they got through like the middle part of season 2, that's when it started going almost fully in order. They weren't going back to tell more stuff. So that could get confusing.
For sure. And I don't want to go too into the Clone Wars, but one thing it did very well is it also really helped to answer the questions people had about from both the second and third prequel movies. In that show, you learn more about why the Separatists are actually doing what they're doing. With Ahsoka, you get to understand much more of the story of Anakin's fall through her eyes. And so there's just, and getting it back to that discussion, I think that's going to be one of the most interesting parts of this Ahsoka show. There's a novel I recently read that was very well done. It's just called Ahsoka. It's in the new canon. And it talks about the time, basically from the end of the Clone Wars until Star Wars Rebels is getting started. And a lot of what it's about is about how she carries so much guilt because she wasn't able to to save Anakin. And also that she's one of the ones who has very negative feelings about the Jedi. Like, she started to recognize all the problems the Jedi have about that maybe telling everyone you can never have attachments isn't really a good idea. Maybe setting all of these absolute rules as a way to say that the people who set absolute rules are bad, the Sith. And so one thing, getting into it, like, I'm really excited to see how Ahsoka is going to have some of that play out. I want to know, where is she now that she knows that Grogu is back? Maybe they're going to hear that, somewhere Luke is looking for new Jedi. Like, I really want to know more about how Ahsoka's feeling about this, because she's probably the person who most saw Anakin fall and who was most affected by that. Or at least that's still alive.
That's still alive, yeah.
Would Obi-Wan be alive during that time?
He's not alive now. No, not during Mandalorian. Because it takes place. It's 9 years after A New Hope.
Yeah.
So he dead.
Like, I don't... Let me ask you this. One of the things that now kind of occurs to me is, Ahsoka has all these feelings, is trying to figure stuff out. And now Anakin Skywalker's children are running around. And are like the heads of this New Republic government and things like that. Or at least Leia certainly is. I don't imagine we'll ever get them all on screen together. But I would love to see some degree of Ahsoka, like, learning about what Anakin's kids did, you know, and that, or even just like, can you imagine the moment where Ahsoka learns that Vader did turn back to Anakin and did turn back to the good side in some way? Like, even if that's in her flashbacks, I want to see some of that, because so much of what I love about her character is just how wrapped up she is in Anakin's story.
Right. I think some of that'll play out, because you got to think that in her connection to the Force, that the redemption would have been felt. Although she did have that aha moment in Rebels where they both realized who each other was. Like, she didn't know that Anakin was Vader, but then remember when they were fighting she was on the ship, and Vader's like, what did you say, like the apprentice or something? Like, they recognized that who the other one was, and were both like, oh crap.
Yeah.
You know, so it all depends on how connected she was, because technically she never became a Jedi again once she left at the end of season 5, which is evident in Mandalorian, which is why she has white sabers.
Right.
So she doesn't have the blue or the green sabers. It's just a colorless kyber crystal.
But didn't Leia not become a Jedi either?
Well, I think she became a Jedi.
She's still pretty force sensitive.
She was a Jedi. She was being trained by Luke, but she never went like further on. Ahsoka literally left the Jedi Order. She said, "You didn't stand by me, and you were accusing me of this stuff. Basically, a big screw you, and you're off." Mm-hmm. Although there was that line in the season 7 where they were, I think it was near the end of it, where they're talking on the hologram or on the holotable, and Yoda says something like, basically, are you coming back? And she said, not yet.
Yeah.
And then she couldn't do anything because Order 66 all of a sudden happened then, so that was basically a moot point. But, you know.
And I think, though, that part of what we learned about her from Mandalorian is that she never is coming back. Like, I got the sense, certainly, that's part of her hesitation about Grogu, is she doesn't want to necessarily see it carried on. One of my favorite lines of dialogue, I think, in all of Star Wars, especially because it's such a great homage to Lord of the Rings in its own way, comes in Rebels when Ahsoka and Vader do have this final climactic lightsaber battle. It's very emotional. It's a great scene. And she's saying, like, Anakin, I think you're still in there. I think I can rescue you. And, you know, he says, no, I have killed Anakin. Vader says, I have killed Anakin. And she says, well, then at least I will avenge his death. To which Vader says, that's not the Jedi thing to do. And she raises her lightsaber and says, I am no Jedi, and charges him. And it's such a great Ahsoka moment. And I think that kind of continued her feelings about the Jedi and where this is all going. It's going to be so interesting to see it play out.
I didn't watch any further, I think, than that episode in Rebels. Do you see her again after that scene?
But only very briefly.
She gets saved.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. That's the one thing about Star Wars I wish they never introduced, that world between worlds, because everyone uses that as a cop-out now to change things. Like, no, please. They used it for a narrative because they put her... Basically, Ezra saves her from that situation because she was getting crushed by the temple was falling in. The temple was falling in. She gets pulled out into the world between worlds, and then when she gets put back in that same spot, but safe. So, but the people are saying, oh, we could change this because we got the world between worlds, and they saw the Ahsoka symbol. Actually, the Ahsoka symbol that they have for the show sort of has that world between worlds type of design to it. Yeah. So I'm just like, I hope they don't use that. But it was a flowing thing.
One important comment. The reason her lightsabers are white is explained in the Ahsoka novel. She winds up defeating an Inquisitor and using the crystals from his lightsabers, which have been corrupted, and basically kind of like saving them to make her own lightsabers. So there's sort of a story reason why they're white, but I think we're all right that it does represent her break from the Jedi. There's so much to cover, but is there anything else people want to see from Ahsoka specifically in terms of where that show goes?
I think it's going to help with. I mean, if they said that the Rangers of the New Republic, the Mandalorian, and Ahsoka are all set in the same time frame, and they're going to merge into an event series, sort of like the Defenders. And I think that with the three of them together, it's going to end up being something where they're going after Thrawn. Because that's Ahsoka's point now. It has nothing to do with the Mandalorian. I could see them having Bo-Katan coming back in for the whole Darksaber thing with Gideon. I'm not sure what the Rangers thing is, but it's gonna. I think the event thing they're gonna do is gonna be something that has to do with Thrawn or the higher ups, because we don't know who the top dog running the Empire is right now, technically.
Right. Well, so let's talk about that. What do folks think we're going to see out of Rangers: The New Republic? Who knows?
No
New
clue.
Republic Rangers, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only. That's one that I have no. There's people talking about that it's going to be Trapper Wolf and Carson Vega, the two, the Filoni and the I can't think of that guy's Kim's Convenience name. Those two X-wing pilots. It's going to be their story, and I'm like, I don't think Filoni's going to spend a lot of time in front of the camera if he's going to be running the thing. So he'll have a cameo here and there like he's done, but I think it's going to have something to do with just their. It could be the Rangers could be like the U.S. military, where it's a covert group, and who knows, they could end up hiring it, especially after this last episode, Bill Burr's character,
Right.
Because he just totally changed everything. And he was freaking phenomenal in last night's episode.
I ended that episode going, why don't we see Star Wars Mayfeld? Like, that's a show we need to see.
I think he'll come back in some way. But
Yeah.
that's the one that's...
Good.
I'd say that's the one that we have the least amount of, I wouldn't say baggage going into, but knowledge going into.
I will say, the thing that I'm probably most hoping for out of Rangers of the New Republic, and both are, well, there's two things. One is that I don't want Mando to become the story of the Republic and the Empire fighting each other. I like the idea of him kind of doing his own thing and it overlapping those things, but it's now getting two shows that are much more about that, But the other thing is, we have a million stories about rebellions overthrowing governments. But it's actually pretty darn hard. We never actually get the story of what happens next. Like, okay, the line from Hamilton, like, you're in charge now. What are you going to do? And I was really excited to see that in the sequels, to see, okay, the Republic is trying to rule. How is it doing? And I was kind of disappointed when 10 minutes into that, or however many minutes in that movie, that all just gets blown up and we never find out about it. I don't think Rangers of the New Republic is not going to be about the politics back home. I want that show, but I think only me and 5 other people do. But I think that it's still going to be about the struggle to sort of reestablish the Republic and all the complaints about it, the concerns about it, and I'm excited for that. I want to see like what's happening as people are trying to replace the Empire, because it's Mandalorian's talked about this. Like, the Empire's evil, it's wrong, it's terrible. It makes the trains run on time. That's why people like authority. So how do you replace all that and still get the trains running? That's I think I don't want to see all the politics of that in Republic, but I want to see the effects of that struggle happening.
I think it'll be a cause and effect thing, though. It'll be something that has to do with the political side of it, but then the Rangers are going out there and dealing with, either, being law officers of the law or being just, stewards of the New Republic. Who knows? So that's why I said you go into it without having any idea what this is going to be. But yeah, there's a lot of fertile ground for it to cover.
Yeah. What about you, Ash? Any kind of thoughts you've had about it? No idea.
What, Rangers? No idea.
It's a lot.
It is kind of weird, though, because they have StarWars.com the next day on Friday had a breakdown of everything, and they have Rangers of the New Republic listed as an ongoing series and Ahsoka as a limited series.
Oh, interesting.
So, they basically did that. Obi-Wan and Lando are event series, and then the rest of them are all series or the anthology and that animated film. So we don't know what the limited and the event. I mean, limited might just be it serves that purpose to end that narrative with what the event thing is, and it's done. Or who knows? I mean, if it's popular, which it has the great possibility of being, they could just keep going with it.
Yeah. A couple other people are agreeing with us about Mayfeld that his character just took off, and I love the questions he was asking, and again, it's giving that man on the street portrayal. It seems really easy to be like, of course, everybody hates the Empire. Everyone wants to fight. A lot of people, it's just like, okay, I just want to, live my life and not be bothered. And I don't care about this Skywalker guy or this Solo person.
No. And that's what I think. That's what the show yesterday, that the title was The Believer. And I think that was Mayfeld going from being at the beginning, doesn't matter the New Republic, the Empire, till at the end going, no, the Empire is terrible. I mean, he saw it firsthand, and he did what he had to do to stop that from happening again when he blew up those two the Rhydonium tankers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he just had such an I mean, he used his face, Bill Burr did, to express so much, and just some of those side glances he had when they were sitting at that table when Din didn't have his helmet on, it was just like, wow. If he doesn't get a nomination for guest actor on a drama, it would be a crime.
Yeah.
And
I'm just like so proud of him. I've seen him come so far.
Oh yeah, because last season he was kind of.
Because I mean, if do you listen to his podcast?
I've listened to some of his stuff, and I like Bill Burr as a comedian. I was listening to the thing yesterday, the 7 minutes in Philadelphia, where he was ripping on Philadelphia all the time, and by the end they were giving him a standing ovation.
That's the best. It's the best
for sure.
Oh, I can't even repeat half the stuff he said. But, I mean, he was on the Chappelle Show, and he started out doing stuff like that and other little parts. And then he was in this movie with Kevin Costner, where he was like his lawyer. And then he got that other... But to see how far someone can come, I was just like, you're crushing it, Bill. I need a Mayfield series immediately.
Yeah. Certainly, I think he's going to be a recurring character.
Him and Cara Dune.
Oh, yeah.
The one last thing I want to ask about this Mando trilogy of shows we now have... Do you think that we're going to see in those shows, to some extent, the beginnings of the First Order, or of Snoke?
I think they pretty much said that they were going to show, in at least The Mandalorian. This was the pitch I saw at Celebration last year in Chicago before the show was even on. That it was going to show breadcrumbs of how the First Order came about. So It might not be like a whole. Subplot of it, but it's just little things that show, because I mean, in all essence, the thing that they might be doing right now, what Gideon is doing, is getting the what they call the M count, which everyone knows that stands for midichlorian, to help with the problem that they're having with Palpatine, because that whole timeline with Palpatine's quote unquote son, who ends up being Rey's father, is happening right around in this time. So that could be what connects it to the First Order and the sequel trilogy.
I know, it's very interesting. Because, didn't we kind of think that that's what was in the episode where he met back up with Lando and Cara Dune, the clones, possibly?
Yeah, certainly.
Oh, yeah, in the vats? Yeah. They're working on some kind of cloning technology.
Yeah, and I like what you say. I don't want Snoke to be... the character who appears in the last episode of all of this. You know, I want it to still be the breadcrumbs, but I like the idea that we're seeing different parts of the Empire playing around with cloning and the Force. We're seeing all the discontent that would let people be like, maybe this First Order thing has a point, you know? So I'm curious to see all that.
Because in the timetable, Rey will be born in like 5 or 6 years, so her father has to be out there somewhere. I mean, obviously he's going to be a sped up genetically clone like that, but it's got to happen sometime soon if it hasn't happened already. And those were the failed, bodies that couldn't contain Palpatine's essence or whatever. So that has to be the connection, I think, to the First Order.
Yeah, that Rey is going to be born soon. Ben Solo should be born pretty soon, and around this time, Luke should be starting to try and find, are there other Force-sensitive people out there? And so I don't want Luke to appear in this, although Stan Sebastian, maybe that can happen. But I would like to at least hear some connection between people like Ahsoka talking to Grogu and the fact that there's someone else in the kind of main New Republic trying to find out more about the Jedi. Like, it'd be nice just to know how those fit together in some way.
And I had a quick thought about how, when they went to Tython and they did Grogu did the thing with the Seeing Stone and he sent out the call pretty much. Who's to say that doesn't attract like 10 people to come there? And then all of a sudden these people all realize that if one of them happens to be Luke, he could be like, all right, you guys all heard that? You're all dead? Okay, cool. Come with me. We're going to start an academy. Something like that. Yeah.
I have an island.
It could be something that, triggers that. Who knows? I mean.
Yeah. And, especially because one thing that Disney Plus didn't talk about at all, because it's not on Disney Plus, but it is Disney, we do have a number of new movies coming out as well. So it may well be that Luke never appears in these things, but that we get a movie about sort of the founding of the Jedi, or, you know, of that academy or something like that, in which they mention like Grogu appears or something like that. I mean, there's just so many possibilities.
Right. And they already did a big enough info dump. They were focusing on the Disney Plus stuff. They did mention the 2 movies, but they're trying to keep it all from, they don't want to get too much too fast, because they realized what happened when they if you think about it, it took them 20 some years to create 6 movies originally, and now we've had 5 in 5 years, and they put so much out there. And it could be, you know, Star Wars isn't Marvel where you could put a movie out every 3 months. You have to let it, even though a lot of my friends were thinking that the once a year thing was sort of, seemed like it was a rushed idea.
Yeah.
But I think now with this platform, with Disney Plus, and with the way that they could put out the good content, and if it connects, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens.
So we could just go the whole time on those, but I want to talk about some other things. So let's talk about some of the other shows. Andor, it had been announced. We didn't know much about it. I am so excited about this one. What are you all thinking about Andor as a new show we get?
I loved Rogue One. I mean, that's my favorite of the new the Disney era movies. And for them to have Tony Gilroy, the guy that came in and, for lack of a better word, did the script doctoring at the end, because Gareth Edwards did a great job, but then they made the movie that Lucasfilm wanted him to make, but then they realized it wasn't quite Star Wars enough, and then Gilroy came in and changed. That's why, if you remember the first trailer for Rogue One, a lot of those scenes weren't in the movie. They took out a lot of that stuff. So Gilroy now being the showrunner of this gives me so much confidence, and then seeing that sizzle reel was like, it looks like Rogue One, so I'll be happy with it.
He directed the Bourne
He directed
movies,
Ferrari
right?
versus Ford, yeah. Or Ford versus Ferrari, or whatever it was.
But she was asking about didn't he also direct the Jason Bourne movies?
Oh, the Bourne
He did
movies.
Bourne
Yeah.
I think, right? Because it's going to be like this is going to be like a spy thriller. I have a question. Who's
Mon Mothma? Did you ever see Return of the Jedi? The
So
woman
she-
that says, many Bothans have died to bring us this information. The older woman with the short hair.
Yeah.
And she was in Rogue One as well.
Okay.
Yeah, she is the leader of the rebellion.
Yeah.
And
Okay, it sounded familiar.
and we saw her she was a former senator who left the Senate because of the Empire, and it's a very important scene in Star Wars Rebels. And she's one who, she's not a fighter at all, but she's an inspirer. You know, and I think in a lot of ways, like, Leia takes over her role, and that Leia's also a general, but she is the one who, like, gives the stirring speech that makes people feel like maybe they don't have to live with maybe they don't have to live under the Empire. You know, she brings the Republic together. And so I'm really excited to see that, because I agree with you. Rogue One was one of my favorites, especially because, I mean, big shock, I like moral grayness. One of my favorite scenes of Rogue One that I feel like so sets the tone is when our hero, Cassian Andor, is meeting with someone who's helping him, and a perfectly good person realizes that they're both about to get caught and just kills that person straight out. You know? And it's like, he's doing what he needs to for the rebellion, and it's the right thing to do, but he just straight up murdered a dude. Like, this is gonna be such a great exploration of, like, how much can you justify, like, doing terrible things in support of this great cause, you know? As well as just, this is when we get to see all these groups starting to decide, like, do we actually join with the rebellion? Do we stay with the Empire? You know, so I think there's just so much great stuff to explore there.
Oh yeah, and it's confirmed 12 episodes for the first season.
Nice.
So they said that.
Wow. I think I'm excited for Vader coming back the most because of Rogue One, because that was definitely my favorite scene, just seeing him come in there and wreck shop like he did. Because you don't really get to see, like, that the older movies. It was awesome, but not like
you don't get to see his full
lightsaber
potential
battles are now.
Yeah.
As you see, and he's just the reason why everyone fears him. That last 2 minutes of Rogue One was just like, yep, this is why he's the Dark Lord of the Sith.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You need more of that. Okay. Well, and so let's jump into that's the next one, Kenobi, because this has been, I think, certainly I had some very strong feelings, and some others did as well. One of the most controversial announcements, that we're getting the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, which we've known we're going to get for a while. It's going to be set about halfway between the end of Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. Luke is going to be about 10 years old at this point. Obi-Wan is living on Tatooine, kind of keeping a watch over him. And we know that Hayden Christensen is going to return to play what they are saying is Darth Vader, not necessarily Anakin Skywalker. How are folks feeling about the show and kind of what we might see and where it might go?
I'm excited for it.
Yeah?
I'm excited because I think what they might do, they'll
Yeah.
for story directive could use flashbacks effectively and have them showing some of their Clone Wars exploits that they were doing together. Not necessarily, or even though you do see in a few things Vader's face, like in Rebels where Ahsoka's fighting him, it cracks open and you see Anakin underneath it.
Right.
And it could be, and this is another gray area too, is because people are like, well, in A New Hope, he says two things. He says, since we last met, I was but the learner, now I'm the master. But he also says, you should not have come back.
Right.
What does that mean? Does that mean that, because Obi-Wan seemed to know his way around that Death Star like he had been there before. So, it leaves, like I said, it's a certain point of view, but
yeah.
I'm glad to see Hayden, because I think he
I agree with you,
was a victim a lot of bad
rematch of the century.
Right. So he's going to probably, and if it happens 10 years between the two, then he could fight him. I mean, he's going to fight him, and he might leave him for dead this time if Anakin's got the high ground or Darth Vader's got the high ground this time. But I think Hayden in Attack of the Clones was very wooden. That has to do a lot with the dialogue. But he also has said that he used his acting, his inspiration of how James Earl Jones's delivery was in the original trilogy. It was very monotone. It was very, that's just how his character was. And I think he was a lot better. He was definitely a lot better in Revenge of the Sith than in Attack of the Clones. That has a lot to do with the dialogue. And you could always go back and say that the prequels could have definitely helped by having someone come in and not have been such a yes man like Rick McCallum was, and giving him a little bit more direction on, because Lucas has never been a great dialogue person. They even said that back in the original trilogy. He's like, you could write this down on paper, but you can't say it.
Empire Strikes Back is the best of the three because he didn't
actors.
write the dialogue.
No.
And part of what Brian's referring to is one of the biggest controversies is this idea that Anakin or Darth Vader and Obi-Wan are going to meet, because most people's interpretations of A New Hope had been that this is their first meeting since Revenge of the Sith.
Right.
I'm not with you. I think the idea of there being flashbacks between the two of them is fantastic. Not all the novels are just named the one name word of the person's name. But another great novel that is now canon is called Kenobi. And it is about Obi-Wan on Tatooine it's when he's first trying to connect with Qui-Gon Jinn, and he's setting himself up to keep an eye out on Luke. And one of the main parts of the book as well is him coming to terms with what happened to Anakin. And he's carrying so much guilt, so much anger, and trying to do the good Jedi thing and push all that aside and really wrestling with it. And the book gives me so much more insight into where he is by A New Hope in terms of how important it is to him that he help Luke and not screw it up again. So I'm super excited to see a Kenobi show. I'm super excited to see what Kenobi can do on Tatooine. Yeah. I'm not with you on Hayden Christensen. I think he's just an awful actor. And
I don't think he'll be a huge part of it.
I'm willing to have an open mind about him, and I'm willing to have an open mind about him and Vader meeting. I feel like this is the prequelitis that we get into sometimes, where we just keep throwing in things that don't fit the canon. So I'm not excited for the match of the century, but I'm going to try and be open-minded, and we're just going to see what happens. And I'm glad to hear other fans who are really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I like what you said, Brian, because I didn't know that I never kind of noticed that you shouldn't have come back here. That's a good point.
Like I said, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, everything from, hell, Rogue One was based off of one line that was in the crawl for original Star Wars, where the Rebel Alliance won its first mission and got the plans to the Death Star. Okay, they make an excellent movie off of that. So that's the I guess the benefit and the problem that Star Wars has is that they use that, but then you could use it a certain way, but then you guys probably all noticed that Star Wars fans are the best, but they're also the biggest crybabies too. Star Wars does have a huge toxic fandom problem, and you could get one thing that two people can just construe completely two different ways. But I think in this sense, you can take something like that and make it, the whole "you shouldn't have come back." Use it as a basically like a launching pad for something like this, to where it's still far enough away that you don't have to justify it by like, why didn't they realize it in Star Wars then? They did a lot in the Clone Wars too, with especially if you've noticed that in the Clone Wars cartoon, Anakin and Grievous never meet, even though there's sometimes when they're close or they're both knocked out and they get dragged by each other, because in Revenge of the Sith, they meet for the first time. Yeah. So, they have to use, especially when you start telling stories in between stuff you've already told, you have to be super aware of not doing something to mess up the canonicity. I don't even know if that's a word, but that type of thing, especially because of Star Wars fans. And
like, I'll be the first to admit, Star Wars Rebels makes A New Hope make no sense at all. Because, part of A New Hope is this idea that, they refer to Darth Vader as this last practitioner of an ancient religion. Except Rebels tells us that there were numerous Jedi running around 2 years ago,
Right.
And Rebels is one of my favorite shows. And so I'm pretty happy to be like, okay, that doesn't match the canon. Who cares? It's a great story. I think that may well happen here.
Well, even Yoda says that Luke was the last Jedi, and we know at that time there were others out there, but they're not. They might not technically be Jedi. Ahsoka's not a Jedi. Grogu's not a Jedi. It's. Or it could just be from, like I said, that certain point of view, or the narrative. Yeah. A lot of it goes with the fact that it wasn't invented yet. So,
yeah. And I think, Matt, Jeff, and I are going to do an episode on superhero ethics soon about how important is canon and the danger of holding on to canon too tightly. Because I do think that's true. Like, sometimes we just have to make some adjustments and make these things happen. I do want to just push back a bit and say, I think there's an awful lot of the Star Wars fandom that is awfully, awfully toxic, and I will not deny that for a second. And I think I'm always glad we're calling it out. And I think sometimes the idea that the Star Wars fandom is worse, I've seen some... we can go back and read DC fans responding to some things and Marvel fans responding to some things. Marvel, I think, has had the problems, but I know certainly a lot of it from DC and from some other fandoms. I do think, though, and I think this is something that we should be able to model, is, I think one of the problems when a fandom is toxic in some ways is it then becomes anyone who has concerns or maybe isn't happy with the direction it's going is now seen as part of that toxicity. And I think there has to be a way for us to, and this is kind of another topic, but to be able to say, like, Hayden Christensen, to some of us, was a pretty bad actor. Which doesn't mean now let's go onto his Twitter feed and bomb him and say, don't do the movie. Like, that's awful. No one should ever do that.
It's how you react to it and how you interact with it. I mean, I can have a conversation. Like I said, I don't have a problem with any of the Star Wars movies. But if I have a conversation, say, with someone like you, Matthew, who might have a problem with Attack of the Clones, we could have a civil discussion about it.
Exactly.
If it ends up being like, well, you like this, so that makes you an idiot, and then you're not a true fan, that's the definition of what the toxic fandom has become. And that has happened a lot with, I mean, I could tell you that there's some people that I don't talk to anymore who I was casual friends with because of Last Jedi, because of how irate and like this, and then they would like lash out at me and other people for liking it. And it's just like, that's not, okay, just relax a bit. And then when you tell them that, don't tell me to relax, it's like, okay, I just don't need this, because I'm mostly a positive, upbeat guy. I don't like having a lot of negativity thrown at me, and if that's what you're always getting when you're engaging someone in that, it's just like, you don't need it. And you go on, which sucks, because I think anyone that's that that involved and loves Star Wars that much, I think that person should be someone you can have a conversation with. It doesn't have to do with their fandom. It has more to do with them as a person, I think. So.
Yeah. We kind of talked about that on this Supernatural podcast about, you should never tell anybody what they see in art is wrong. Like, everything means something different to somebody else, and everything's interpreted different to everybody else. And it's supposed to be like that. And you can't tell somebody that something that they get out of something is wrong, because that's wrong.
It would honestly have never occurred to me that some people thought Hayden Christensen was a good actor. Like, that's how, like, until this last, and maybe that's part of the thing, is that feeling was so overwhelming that no one wanted to talk about it. And so I intentionally put something up on Facebook saying, if you think he's a good actor, tell me why. And, forbade anyone to argue with it. And I've been really glad. I'm hearing other people's perspectives on that, hearing about people who love the prequels in ways I didn't. That helps me be a better fan. It doesn't convince me that I'm wrong, because it doesn't have to.
No, and it doesn't have to. Your opinion is your opinion.
Yeah.
And I would think, if anything, it could be swayed to the positive if you see stuff through a more positive light than what you're used to hearing or seeing. When you say, like, oh, well, this is what I think is what's happening, and you're like, oh, okay, I can see that now. Yeah. It's not as, detrimental to your thinking of it. So then it makes you end up being like, okay, I can see it. But when you start going after someone for like that, and you're not civil about it, that's just what,
And it's nostalgia. We have to, think that the new wave of people who loved the original movies, there's also this new wave of younger people who grew up with the, the prequels and really did love them, and just based off nostalgia are going to be excited that honestly, that's happening.
A New Hope I saw when I was 5 years old. And so the idea of anything questioning it, that's the one canon I hold on to, and we all do that. I think just knowing that about ourselves. So putting that aside, we'll get to have that debate, but I've promised, starting 6 months before that show comes out, I won't say a word negative about Christensen. But what do we want? What else do we want? Like, obviously it's not just going to be him and Darth Vader all the whole time. What are we hoping to see out of the Kenobi show as well?
I got one thing, and that's it, is that the first opening shot is they pan on to Ewan, and he just starts off and he goes, "Hello there." That's his first line.
Yes.
The rest of it could be whatever, but it's just, it's, I don't know what to expect, because with it being, it could be anything. It's not going to be, just him watching after Luke, because that would be boring as hell.
Right.
But it's Ewan is such a good actor that, we'll see why he, in 20 years, went from looking like Ewan McGregor in Revenge of the Sith to Alec Guinness in A New Hope. So,
do you think
Tatooine sand does it to you?
Do you think we're going to get 10-year-old Luke as a character?
The stress.
I think we'll probably see him in some sense.
See him in the distance.
I don't think, like I said, with this being, for what I've read, a shorter series, it'll end up being the equivalent. I think it was 6 45-minute episodes, so it'll be like 4 hours, which would be like 2 movies.
Yeah.
So,
nice.
They're going to have to focus in on one thing and not have to, they don't have the luxury of sidestepping whatever their main point of it is, because it is going to be so focused. But as long as it has to do with something, obviously the Vader thing is going to come into it. So he's obviously going to go off planet, because there's no way that Vader is coming to Tatooine. So
yeah. And one thing I've been thinking of is it would be nice if it just sort of Kenobi is hearing stories. Like someone's like, oh my God, I was at this battle and we saw Vader do this. And so we're getting a lot of Kenobi learning about these things. One thing I really want, and I don't know if we're going to get this, but this comes from both that novel I was talking about and from the Clone Wars. We know that Kenobi has himself been very tempted by love. In the Clone Wars, we get this beautiful story about him falling in love with a Mandalorian Duchess, Satine. And that he's tempted to leave the Jedi Order for her. And I've always thought, it's never explicitly said, but I've always thought that's part of why he kind of doesn't put more of a stop to Anakin and Padme.
Yeah.
Is because he has a little bit of that soft spot for it. And in the novel, Kenobi, he meets a new person who very clearly is interested in him. And it does seem like he's flirting with her to some extent. And I think that would both be an interesting thing to explore, but also interesting to have a little bit more explicit the way in which his own experience with this, how he feels. Did we make a mistake in not allowing Anakin to be open about his love for Padme? Could that have been different? I'd love to see something with that, especially if it's, Ewan McGregor is also a very good looking man and a good romantic actor. And so it'd be nice also to see that, the monk wanting to flirt, but having to hold back.
I think also, now that I thought about it, the one scene I want to see, and it would obviously be in a flashback at the beginning of it, is the last we see, he leaves Mustafar and he leaves Vader / Anakin for dead. He goes into hiding. And in there's a novel that takes place after Revenge of the Sith where it's Anakin learning to come to terms with him being in the suit. And there's a scene at the end where it's for lack of a better word, Kenobi is in like a bar and he sees the holo feed and it says Darth Vader and his minions, and all of a sudden he goes, Darth Vader's still alive? So it's the realization that he knows that Vader is, because he knows that Vader is Anakin because of the holo feed at the end of the hologram he sees at the temple of Palpatine anointing him. So the minute that he recognizes that Vader is now this black samurai looking guy, has to almost be like the holy crap, now I do have to, protect his kid. Yeah. Although why he would leave the name Skywalker on his planet that he grew up on in the homestead, is another thing, but...
So many questions. Yeah, and that holo feed, that's exactly the kind of stuff I'm talking about. I want to see, Kenobi learning about what Vader has become, and then flashing back to a conversation he had with Anakin or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Let's move on. We've gone pretty long, and I want to get out of here after not too much longer, but the Bad Batch. These are a couple of characters who were introduced in season 7 of Clone Wars. They are a couple of clones who were they're not exact. They're like, there are 5 of them. They're not quite right. What are folks' thoughts? Actually, I assume you have no idea what any of this is about, right? Yeah.
Nope. No. I have Force 99.
Well, that actually is kind of funny because one of them was, it was called 99 in the Clone Wars, where they show an episode where they're training they're basically the clones that are not as subservient, and they're basically the rejects. Mm-hmm. And so that's what they created the Bad Batch for, and they're specialized. Like one of them is a little, it almost the Bad Batch is pretty much almost synonymous with the A-Team. You've got this one guy that's a big brute that's kind of nutty, and you got another guy who's a sniper, and another guy that's a tech guy. And then at the end of it, one of the actual clones, Fives, becomes the member of the Bad Batch. But it's basically a way that they continue the story post Order 66 in the animated style that the Clone Wars was. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited for that, just because that animated style was I always loved it.
Yeah, and I think that's going to have a much smaller run. It's going to have a smaller audience. Do you think? And here we're going very deep into stuff, and we won't do this too long. But Brian, do you think it's going to be in part inspired by the Republic Commandos books?
It could. That would have been. I don't know how much they're going to pull from Karen Travis's stuff, but I think that could be some of the basis for the style they are, because the Republic Commandos were an elite fighting force used during the Clone Wars to do some of the more the dirtier jobs. So I think that's what the Bad Batch was sort of alluding to in season 7. So yeah, I think the thing that kind of gets me though is that in this trailer you see them, looks like they're taking orders from Tarkin. Mm-hmm. So they're still clones, they're still working for what was the Republic, which is now the Empire. But if I remember right, these guys don't have the inhibitor chips in them, right. Or they're not working right. Obviously Fives doesn't, so they didn't get messed up by the whole Order 66 thing. So it could be that they're covertly working with what are, the early stages. I mean, it wouldn't be the rebellion, but I've already saw that Bo-Katan is going to be in the Bad Batch, at least the first season. Right. So that character from the Clone Wars, that's cool. I think, it's basically, is this going to be a new name for, it could possibly be the season 8 of the Clone Wars.
Right.
So
honestly, the feeling I got when I heard about it was A-Team. Like, this feels like it's going to be the group that they're going to be on the run. They're going to be trying to do their own thing and doing their own tasks. I just think it's going to be a fun story. I don't think it's going to have super importance for everything else, but it'll be fun to look into. Lando. How are we feeling about Lando?
We don't know anything about it. That was the one thing I was pissed off, is when they said, and here's a sizzle reel from the guy that created Dear White People, and then it went for 1 minute and 20 seconds of the countdown. Like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
But from what I've heard of the people that did see it,
did that.
They don't.
They did that a lot. I thought that was just. I was like, oh, what? I didn't watch it live, so now I can't see it, because they did that for. They're like, here's some scenes from Obi-Wan, and then it cut to a blue screen with trivia. I was like, what? I
think the idea is that the investors are supposed to be the ones who get that kind of special advanced knowledge, I guess, and they all sign NDAs.
Right. I was like, you don't know. You don't know I got stock in Disney?
Yeah.
Show me.
All we know about Lando is that he's the character. We don't know if it's Glover. We don't know if it's Billy D. Williams. We don't know what time frame it's set in. We don't know anything about it.
Yeah. I'd love to have both.
Us.
I'd love whether it's like Billy D. Williams giving kind of voiceover or like two kind of parallel stories that are happening kind of like, you know, they're each doing their own thing, but we're learning about both. Like
it could almost be, you remember the TV show in the early 90s, The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles?
Yeah.
Where it had Sean Patrick Flaherty as Indy, but you had some shows where Harrison Ford was on it or did some narration. It could be almost, it's Lando in his older days giving memoirs like he was doing, in, like Donald Glover was doing in the Solo movie, and they're just acting him out, though. So it could be both. It could be both of them act. I mean, I don't know how much Billy D. Williams could actually do as a lead of a show because he is 83 years old, 84, and he was sort of limited in Rise of Skywalker, but they already have Donald Glover under their umbrella with FX, so I think utilize it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the other thing is like Donald Glover is also a very popular, very busy man right now, and so that's the one thing, but if we can get him, great.
And that's another limited series, so
that'll help, I think, a lot.
It's an event series like Obi-Wan, so it could be one season, 6 episodes, equivalent to 2 movies, done.
Yeah.
I'm also really excited about Acolyte. And I know Acolyte, again, we know almost nothing about. I think in part because I just want something that has no connection to the Skywalker world in the slightest.
No.
As I understand, this is the High Republic is the period from about 300 to 100 years before the Battle of Yavin. And this is going to be set at that time. And the Acolyte refers to, at least from the books that we're told it's inspired by, an acolyte of a Sith apprentice. And so
a dark side leaning tendency,
right. So this may be sort of the beginning of a line that leads. I mean, there's been an unbroken line of Sith for millennia,
1,000 years.
But
at this time, the Sith would have been Darth Tenebris, which is Darth Plagueis's master.
Right.
So he could be. It could. I mean, because they said at the end of the High Republic. So this should take place roughly around 100 years before A New Hope. So it's still so in that. I mean, I would assume that with that time frame, you probably could have a couple Yoda appearances because he's around and he's a Jedi and stuff like that. And the High Republic as itself, that storyline is a huge marketing, like a publishing push that they're doing starting in January. They got a novel, they've got 3 comic series, and then I think they have novels coming out like every 2 months for 2021. So it's going to be a big, that's going to be the stopgap right now in the storytelling because there's going to be nothing as far as on Disney Plus until the end of 2021. So, and it's got a cool concept too. So,
yeah,
they said a mystery thriller.
Basically, what happens is that a ship explodes in hyperspace, and the parts of the ship are still going in hyperspace, but they don't know where they're coming out. So all of a sudden, this ship could come out of hyperspace 5 light years away, and next thing you know, there's a piece of a ship hurtling towards something. So that's just the basis they have. So, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I think that's going to be real good.
I love anything dark side.
I think that's all the shows then. So the last one I want to touch on, it wasn't announced as part of the Disney thing, but we got it right about the same time. Rogue Squadron.
Yes.
Here. Oh, actually, one thing I just want to say quick, backing up. Brian, all the stuff you just talked about, that's all from Legends books that are non-canon, right?
Well, the Darth
Plagueis has become in canon, but
the Darth Tenebris in the novel was Darth Plagueis' master, but that is Legends. The whole High Republic thing that we just mentioned with the hyperspace blowing up, that's canon. Right. That's the thing that's coming out now.
Right. But I think it'll be kind of like a Marvel Civil War thing, where we're rewriting the canon in these new novels and stuff, and it's going to be very inspired by the Legend stuff, but it might be pretty different, No,
I think especially with how well received the Darth Plagueis novel was, and he is, Darth Plagueis as a character is canon because of Revenge of the Sith.
Right.
His backstory may not be, but it would be easy enough to just slot that in and have it be canon.
Exactly. I think so. So yeah, Rogue Squadron, which again is based on the name of it, and I'm assuming a lot of it itself comes from another very successful set of Legends novels. So again, here we have something that's going to be not the same story probably, and it's about a lot of the characters who we hear reference to, Biggs and Wedge, and
Hobby
and
Jansen and
and some of those other the fighter pilots. And I love the idea that is it Jenkins or Jennings?
Patty Jenkins, yeah.
Patty Jenkins, who directed Wonder Woman as well as some other things. Her father was a fighter pilot, and so she's always wanted to make kind of like a fighter pilot type movie, kind of like a Top Gun thing. She's never said those words, but I'm putting Top Gun the kind of example of what she's talking about. And so to have like that kind of a fighter pilot movie about Rogue Squadron, that's such a unique take that I would love to see.
Yeah, we said that's another thing. We don't know what time frame that is, but it's Rogue Squadron was big in. Rogue Squadron was the name of, in the movies at least, the snow speeders on Hoth were the Rogue Squadron.
Right.
But they were in the novels. It was the X-wing. Sometimes Wedge was Rogue One. Sometimes Luke was Rogue One if he came in. But yeah, there's 9 books with Michael Stackpole and Aaron Alston that were just phenomenal, because it's not all fighter stuff, because these guys were also trained agents. So there was a lot of espionage and a lot of flying into somewhere, breaking into something, then coming out and having a dogfight for it. So those books are phenomenal. Well, there was a couple of quick things here. The Visions show, anthology series, is going to be
there's like 2 or 3
anime.
more.
It's basically anime inspired, or anime artists from Japan doing Star Wars inspired shorts. They said short movies or short films, so that could be anywhere from 10 minutes to half an hour. Yep. And then a Droid Story, which is an animated movie that's going to follow R2 and 3PO with a new character, they said. Right.
Who's going to tie into the films?
It's going to tie in. It'll be canon in that way with them too. But they were sort of. She was sort of vague on that. Yeah. But the one thing they did say, and this intrigued me, and I put this in the group yesterday when we were mentioning this, is that Kathleen Kennedy specifically said that the Star Wars history is expansive. It stretches over 25,000 years. And then they were mentioning Taika Waititi's film in progress, and they showed this vision.
That was my last.
And what this thing looks like is there's this like a pyramidal, double-sided pyramid that looks like what's called a Thoyor ship, which used to bring old Jedi like 25,000 years ago to the planet Tython, which is now canon in Mandalore, or the Mandalorian, to get trained by the Jedi. It wasn't the Jedi, it was JED apostrophe AII. Right. Which was a precursor to the Jedi. It was, Force people and Force sensitives. But when they had that, and especially the logo that they put next to Taika Waititi's head, that Star Wars, looked kind of like a prehistoric type logo, and animated like how they would have like something 10 million BC. So that leads me to believe that Taika's movie could be set in the beginning of how the people that were figured out how to use the Force. Again, another thing that's just mind-blowing to think that, and especially Taika Waititi, I can honestly say I don't think I've ever seen something of his that I did not enjoy. Yeah. His movies, his TV shows, whatever it is. The guy's a mad genius, and I love it.
And I think that's such a good point, because as much as I love the Skywalker saga, I think it can sometimes make the whole galaxy feel very small. Right. That's part of why I hated that Rey is Palpatine's granddaughter, because I want to feel a bigger, wider universe with more family lines and things like this. And so, telling stories from 100 years in the past, as well as 100,000 years in the past, and maybe some other stuff that's just about like a story about a bunch of like pirates living out, in a totally different part of the galaxy who, kind of know this war's going on, but they don't care. They're just having their adventures. There's just so much in this universe to explore, and I love that we're just getting all of it now.
Yeah.
I feel like that's at the end of everything. They kind of were like, we're done with the Skywalker story for a while. Yeah. So, like, as much as it'd be nice to see Luke and them like pop up every once in a while, I'm also just kind of like done with it.
That handcuffed the narrative where it had to be focused on that specific thing, which is why a lot of ways they could get around saying, well, we didn't see this happen in this movie because that wasn't the focal point. It's a big world. It's a gigantic galaxy. There's a lot more stories to tell that could be almost like, what's that Shakespeare, the Guildenstern and Rosencrantz?
Guildenstern Den.
Where they're there and they're off to the side, but they're doing their own thing. So it could sort of like merge in a bit so it keeps that same feel, but they're off doing a whole completely different thing.
I love that you made that connection, because we've been making that same connection on the other episodes of this podcast. So that's awesome that we both see it that way.
Cool.
Yeah, like one thing that Mandalorian I think helps remind us of is it's easy to think that the war between the rebellion and the Empire consisted of a couple of battles. There was the Battle of Yavin, there was the battle, destroying the Death Star, and then the battle on Hoth, and then some fighting at Bespin, and then the battle to destroy the second Death Star. And Cara Dune, like, the reality is that there were so many campaigns, this drawn-out fight between these two armies and fleets that we never see. And so it's nice to see, like, yeah, there's so much more to this war to explore.
Because that wasn't part of the Skywalker saga in the films. So once you think at the end of Return of the Jedi as a kid, it's like, oh, it's happy. Everyone's, happy. And then you see, like, in Rise of Skywalker, that Death Star actually came and crashed on the planet and could have killed a bunch of people. That's a big thing that being exploded in that planetary system. It could have done a lot more damage that they couldn't control.
I mean...
Physics be damned.
Yeah.
The Heir to the Empire's books that introduce Grand Admiral Thrawn, a key part of the story is the way that just a single starship crashing on a planet totally destroyed the environment, and how that affects. So yeah, there's so much to go into. So again, we could talk about all this forever. I think this is kind of a good time to wrap up. Any other last things or comments that either one of you didn't get a chance to say?
Nope. I'll just say it's a great time to be a Star Wars fan.
Yeah. Or becoming a Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
Like,
imagine just popping in now.
You got a lot of people around here that can help you, guide you in the right direction. So
yeah, but like I said, I think it's great that we also have. I think that my one fear is that we start to get to a point where, like, none of us are doing it. I hope, but Brian, like that toxicity you talked about, it'd be easy to fall back into. Oh, well, you don't know all these 8 Easter eggs that were in that TV show from this novel from 15 years ago. You're not a real fan.
No,
and I think it's great that we have both. I think that there's those of us who are feeling all this payoff from the stuff we loved as a kid that just we thought had been abandoned is great. But also, if you're because in some ways I feel like I'm getting to play the flip side that I do on the MCU. I am one of the biggest MCU fanboys that's out there. I have not read a single MCU comic book in my entire life. My fandom is 100% from the movies and the TV shows. And granted, things like the MCU cast help me see more, and I hope this podcast helps people see more. But I think it's going to be so important that there are fans who you've seen a couple movies, you've seen The Mandalorian, maybe all you've seen is The Mandalorian and now Ahsoka. That's great. I think I was so afraid with how bad the sequels went over. Granted, they made tons of money, but like at first it seemed like maybe they were going to pull the plug on all these things. I think 20 years from now, we're going to talk about The Mandalorian the way we talk about the movie Iron Man, of having launched this whole new thing, because I think Mandalorian, it was kind of the palate cleanser. It got the post-quels out of our mouths, and it showed Disney there is still this huge market for Star Wars stuff.
Right, and they couldn't have done that 2 or 3 years ago because they didn't have this platform they have now. Disney Plus is a game changer. I mean, as we've seen across the board. Yeah. I mean, Disney, Marvel, Star Wars. It allows it to be so much more of an expansive storytelling medium that you could use. And on top of the fact too, if you watch those galleries, the volume that they created is just going to make it's a game changer. I mean, they started a new technology. Again, Lucasfilm and ILM for the last 45, 50 years they've not adapted to with the technology that's out there. They've created the new technology that people use. Now they're building those volumes. There's one in what they're filming in now, but they're building another one in LA, one in Australia, and one in
cool.
London. And it just creates a whole new way that you could make a cinematic movie or TV show on 20% of the budget.
Right.
Because
you don't LED screens.
Yeah. You can't tell.
It looks like you're there.
Yeah. There's a few times watching Mando that you can maybe, if you're looking for it, but otherwise and then when they show behind the scenes things, you're like, that was not on location. Holy cow. And
yeah.
I mean, this is weird to talk about, but 20 years later, Ashley and I talked about this when we watched Supernatural. We did our Supernatural podcast, and we talked about how much the writer's strike just disrupted so much.
Yeah.
I think we're 20 years from now, when we're talking about TV and movies, we're going to talk about this awful the pandemic is awful for so many more reasons than this, obviously. but we're going to talk about how it had a major, disruptive effect on media. I think Disney Plus with its technology has been one of the few that's really been able to find ways to keep going. And I certainly hope they were safe, and I hope no one's gotten sick. And I'm, very much don't want people doing more dangerous things. I don't want any of these movies in theaters yet if it's not safe yet.
No.
But I think that we may come out of this thinking Disney was one of the ones that figured out how to do this. Or at least figured, you know what? How about if we can't make movies, we're just going to plan everything now.
Right.
So, well, great. Well, thank you so much to both of you. Thank you to all the people listening along in our chat. And to all the people who are going to listen to this episode when it comes out, thank you so much. We'd love to hear your thoughts. How are you feeling about this new content? What's the story we didn't talk about that you want to get into? What's something you're super excited about we haven't talked about? Or something you totally disagree with us? Again, you're a great set of fans. Let's disagree. Let's talk about each other. Let's have reasonable arguments. And, because to me, this is where this is all born. For me, the germ of this podcast started 20 years ago. I'm old. Who knows? When Paul and I would go down to Atlantic City and play poker, and we'd have these epic debates about whether or not Darth Vader was the protagonist of the 3 original Star Wars movies, and just these great conversations. We've been having these conversations for years. Brian, sounds like you have as well. Ashley, you're getting into them.
Oh, yeah.
This is what I love. So fans, please write in. Let us know what you think. Burkett the Nerd has just signed on to the chat. Hello. Glad to have you here. I'm unfortunately we're about to sign off, but all the ways you can find us, if you go to straightedpanda.com, click on Star Wars Universe Podcast. You can find all the great things we're doing there. You can also, on Stranded Panda, find a lot of other things that Ashley and Brian are doing on PandaVision, on Bingers Assemble. They've been doing deep dives into a lot of the DC movies. They've been really great. Pretty soon, Ashley and I will be doing something on The Stand, the new TV show coming to CBS All Access.
I can't wait for that.
So check all that out. Brian, maybe we'll have you on as guest sometime. It's been great having you get to talk about it. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, definitely check out Brian and Jay Scotty doing Fargo. Because I'm on the end of season 2 because you guys started that podcast, and I can't stop. The last 4 days have just been Fargo. Season 1, I'm almost done season 2.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Aliens? I mean,
And if I do want to say one thing for people that are a little confused or lost with all this new the new information that's coming, there's a Star Wars wiki called, of all things, Wikipedia. And you go there and it actually gives you put someone's name in, and if it has both the legends and the canon, there's a tab for each one of them. So if you look and put Bo-Katan, it'll say what's actually canon now and what's legends. And it is a great resource to get you basically like a cheat on reading all the information on all these new characters. So if you have no idea who Ahsoka is, you can go on there. And I think it's actually about 30 pages worth of stuff.
Wikipedia.
So it's a great resource for anyone that's out there that's getting into the new stuff that they're throwing at you.
Awesome. So thank you all. Fans, definitely keep writing into us. Listeners, all the people in part of the chat, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Booty.